Hi, I'm Pestell, and you're watching Fancy Pancake.
Yes, that's right. It is week 4, and we are back with Pancake Stacks. It is such an incredibly exciting time in the fantasy season, and I'm joined by just as incredibly exciting a guest, Pestell from TH Fancy Football. Pestell, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Thank you very much for having me as well. Really appreciate coming onto your show after we've had you on ours. So yeah, looking forward to talking some week 4.
Absolutely. And so I came on recently to do a sort of the beginner's basics type guide to redraft. And that's some of the market that you've been looking at. How have you been finding interactions with those sorts of players from the work that you've been doing?
I think what's really interesting, as we said on our record, is it's very easy to forget. It's a very quick learning curve with fantasy football, and just from knowing enough players to be able to draft a full roster, especially if you're early into your NFL kind of journey as well. Understanding the waivers, those sorts of things that we now take for granted are part of our, as sad as it is, our weekly routine as we do in fantasy football. It's those things that you forget when you were new to the game, you weren't aware of. And I mean, we both do fantasy football because we love playing it. We're very fortunate. We've interacted with loads of people from the fantasy community via our Best Ball charity tournament as well. So yeah, it's just really nice to interact with people and bringing more people into the game that we love. So ultimately, we've got more leagues that we can kind of join in with people as well, I guess.
Absolutely. And I meant to message you actually. I went for dinner with my brother and his wife the other day. And my brother is the person who got me into fantasy football. He is a massive Rams fan, same as me. He actually played American football just in university here in the UK, and he now coaches as well. So he is really like an expert on all things NFL. And he started up a fantasy league with a few friends, including his wife, who don't really know anything about NFL. One of them drafted players. So their first 2 picks were Justin Jefferson and Josh Jacobs, which is fine. That's a fine start to a draft. Then they decided they were just going to draft other players who were JJs. And obviously, there's not that many in the league. So eventually, you're drafting players that retired in 2016. Another just drafted players whose names they liked. So ended up with Puka Nakua. That's obviously quite a nice one. But then again, Jake Bobo, who is a special teamer, and Debrickashaw Ferguson, who not only has retired but was an edge rusher. But anyway, the reason I say is that when I met them for dinner, my brother's wife, who doesn't follow the NFL at all, was delighted to tell me that she'd beat my brother that week in that league. So a lot of the time, yeah, when we think we're experts, actually, there's so much more luck to this game than we think there is.
100%. And that's the joy. So we were speaking on our request that sometimes your process can be absolutely perfect. You can follow all the data points, you can follow all the logic, and then something completely unforeseen happens because we're playing a game based on a game. That then the luck is always there, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. We don't actually know. It's not Madden. We don't actually control the players. We're just guessing what we think is going to happen in the game ahead of us. Let's get on to thinking about week 4 itself. And I mentioned in a video yesterday that week 3 particularly was quite strange, and it's been quite a strange season because obviously a lot of the first round has kind of flopped. We've ended up with a lot of the highly drafted players have been really disappointing. How have you found the season as a whole? How is your redraft season really going?
I think I've been lucky when it comes to my running backs holding the fort for me, if I'm honest, because Alvin Kamara and J.K. Dobbins were 2 players that I thought were excellent values, and that's worked out. But following the QB points, following the wide receiver points as well, and then we were looking this week at, is it time to panic with some of your players you drafted in the top 3 rounds? And the list was huge. The number of players that we could panic about, tight ends especially. I think the tight end landscape has meant that teams that were picking later on, or I think consensus was kind of picking tight ends. One of the top 4 or 5 was what a lot of people wanted to do. That's not worked out. I'd gone quite heavily in on Jordan Love in places. That's not worked out at the moment. Hopefully will come true. But yeah, it kind of reiterates what we said before. You put all that planning, then you just leagues are won by how you navigate injuries, how you work around the waivers, how you cope with the players that aren't the top players when you actually get into it. And then also working out when is the time to pull the trigger on those waiver pickups. Like Jerron Jennings this week. I was thinking, this is Brandon Knight. Obviously, it's Brandon Knight. It's always going to be Brandon Knight. Right, I've missed the boat on that now because he's now 60% rostered. So, yeah, it has been a funny old season. The injuries are always, I think we always say this time of the year, it's been bad for injuries again this year, but I think that's part of the knock-on of the off-season format and the pre-season games. But yeah, right, it has been an off-season. It has been an iffy season when it comes to certain things. And I think tight end landscape especially has been one of the tougher things to navigate in redraft this year.
Yeah, definitely. When I was doing the show yesterday, looking at 4 starts of the week, one at each position, trying to find a tight end that I actually wanted to start was genuinely impossible. And that includes Travis Kelce, like it includes all of the guys right at the top. And now even Trey McBride, who was the one of those top drafted tight ends that you liked, is now out for the week. Like it's a cursed position. It's definitely, as you say, it's that time of the year when we have to start looking at the truth of what's in front of us. And, you know, we drafted these players, but now we're looking at, okay, well, where do I start the waiver wire pickups? Like, where do I find those gems who actually are going to start ahead of different players? I brought up Tyreek Hill and Malik Neighbors yesterday, and Malik obviously was still drafted pretty high, but Tyreek Hill is nearly unstartable at the minute. Malik Neighbors is a clear wide receiver 1. Like, I'm not sure I'd take anyone over him, aside from maybe Justin Jefferson. But with that in mind, I really like the players that you've picked looking at this week, because some of them are, you know, those players that you really weren't sure about when you drafted them, and maybe quite late. Maybe you were really high on them. There's one particular that I think if you drafted very, very late on, now could be about to explode. But let's start off with the first player that you love for week 1. And I really like this one as sort of okay, what's the evidence of what's in front of us? And how can we learn for who this player is right now? So who's the first player that you love for week 4?
So first of all, this is a begrudging one because it's the matchup that makes him so appealing. That's Khalil Shakir. Honestly, a player that I largely ignored through the offseason. I was not massively high on Keon Coleman. I thought Curtis Samuel felt like a value and had a route to high target share. I think the picture of the target share in Buffalo is very different to what we've seen before. As Josh Allen was talking himself about this week, it's a case of putting the ball where the ball needs to be, not a matter of putting the ball where who wants it, which obviously definitely wasn't a Diggs comment, but sounds a bit like a Stephon Diggs comment. And Shakir seems to be emerging as the wide receiver 1 in Buffalo at the minute. So he's only got 14 targets through the first 3 weeks, but that is the highest target share. I think just below him then is James Cook and then Kincaid. So he's the clear number 1 as far as the wide receiver targets go. He's caught every target. If the ball's thrown to him, he catches it. And I was then looking back at those 14 off 14 this year, over his short career so far, it's only 79 times, but he's caught 63 of those. So he's a safe pair of hands, and he's obviously got a safe pair of hands throwing in the ball as well. This week against Baltimore, so unfortunately, given up the most yards per game to the pass at the moment. Yes, for the Chiefs, Raiders, you wouldn't expect to be right, but Adams had one of his big games then and a couple of fantastic catches. Dak threw for 379 yards. Obviously, that was chasing the game as well. I expect Shakir to have a really, really solid game in week 4. I think he is now a clear and obvious flex play every single week. I think this week could be his second week in a row being a wide receiver 2 on the week as well.
Is there any concern looking at potentially Kyle Hamilton and that matchup if Khalil Shakir lines up in the slot as he does tend to? Although I say that, like, every single weapon that the Bills have is basically a slot wide receiver. If Khalil Shakir lines up out of the slot, do you think there could be some concern with Kyle Hamilton kind of following him around the field?
So there's been a little bit of talk this week about moving Kyle Hamilton more into the middle of the field. Obviously, he's been there, I think it's 30% on previous games. So yeah, that will be that question mark. I think it's going to depend how Nate Wiggins evolves as well into the role, because he was looking much better. Well, he's not featured heavily, but he was looking good, kind of as advertised last week. So also how that kind of comes through. I think obviously Kincaid is going to attract a lot of attention as well. Yeah, potentially that would be the question mark, but it's kind of not really worked so far for the Ravens defense, and unfortunately, I don't see that changing. And if I do think this is going to be a bit of it's got to be a statement game for Baltimore this week. But even if that happens, that means Josh Allen's just going to throw it more. And I think the Ravens defense have been so good against the run. I think that just the clear route is going to be throwing it over and over and over and over and over again for Buffalo this week.
Yeah, and as you say, like with Josh Allen being quoted saying that the ball's going to go to whoever's open, Khalil Shakir is the best separator on this team currently. And obviously Keon Coleman has had a decent start to his rookie career. Obviously didn't play in the first quarter last week because he was being punished for showing up late to practice, but potentially then could get more of a snap share this week. But I really, really like this one. I agree, though, that Khalil Shakir was someone I had basically no exposure to because I went out. I always like to follow money, and they obviously went and paid Curtis Samuel, and then they drafted Keon Coleman very early on. And I thought Khalil Shakir was just going to be sort of that third man, potentially fourth with Kincaid as well. But Khalil Shakir seems like the one. And that the ceiling isn't too high. The ceiling is probably around the sort of wide receiver 15 to 20 range. But considering who is being drafted down in the sort of 30s to 40s, like that is a huge performance for him. So yeah, I really, really like this one for Khalil Shakir. Let's move on to the first player that you hate. And I got told off by Dave Kluge for doing loves and hates. And I know it's obviously it's a very YouTubey thing. Yeah, it's a very YouTubey thing to sort of over dramatize everything and love and hate. But this is this is a player who's come up a few times on this show before. And actually someone who I also brought up on the Wildcard Rewind as someone that I thought could potentially have a down week this week. So I'm intrigued to see that you've thought a relatively similar thing. And again, a similar one where was very low drafted, but then has performed very well these first few weeks. Who do you think potentially could underperform this week in week 4? Or who do you hate if you want to go in that harshly with it?
So on TH Fantasy Football Show, we are all for extreme use of kind of emotional language and loves and hates. However, I must specify, although he is one of my hates of the week, I absolutely love this player, and that is J.K. Dobbins. But I hate the matchup. And we said this last week. He was one of our sits of the week last week going up against the Steelers. And he's going to be in a tough situation again here. So I can't hate him, but he's in for such a tough game. Herbert, still questionable. So what will the game script look like from there? The O-line's banged up, so it looks like Joe is set to miss this week. Looking at the game line, it's only 40.5 points, and the Chiefs are plus 7.5 favourites. So that gives the Chargers an implied points total of 16. The Chiefs have also allowed the third fewest fantasy points to running backs so far this season, only 15.77. And I think this is, especially at the start of the season, this is where the trends are starting to make a bit more sense. You can never go, oh, they're giving it the most yards week 1. It doesn't matter in that way. But 3-4 weeks in, that's where that data is starting to become a little bit more usable. And I think that's something we really need to focus on. That was very apparent with the Steelers last week. I think it's going to be the same here as well. None of those points are anti-J.K. Dobbins points whatsoever. He is back with a bang. As a Ravens fan, I'm gutted that we didn't get to see more of that when he was in purple. But in the preseason, when we were talking about him, he was one of my hot takes was that he would be a top 24 running back this year. That doesn't seem so hot now. That seems like quite a fairly routine take to have. But every time he was on the field alongside Gus Edwards, he looked better. He looked more explosive. He looked absolutely fantastic. But you can't argue against the numbers about what's going on. Running backs, especially against strong rush defenses, don't tend to outperform that. When you look at your wide receivers, you can get that boom play that kind of offsets the data a little bit. But I think if you're seeing that low running back production against the defense, and the Chiefs have been good at this for a long time, I think you've got to take note of that. Last week as well against the Steelers, he was impacted massively by that strong run defense, down to 2.93 yards per carry. And I think we're probably going to be looking at a similar situation this week for him. Absolutely love him. Would have got him in lots of roster and will play him throughout most of this season, just not this week.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. And I think this is the case, isn't it? We have to look at the matchup in front of us, not just the talent of the player, unless it's, one of the true elites that you're just willing to start no matter who is in front of them. But I really like, I was listening to your Fantasy 5 show this morning, and when you're looking to identify your starts of the week, looking at over-unders, looking at points totals and saying, well, where does Vegas think there's going to be points this week? And that actually works in reverse. That you look at the lower over-unders and you go, I don't really want to start lots of players there, especially because the Chiefs, we know, are the better offense. And if they get up early, which they probably will, to be honest, the Chargers defense hasn't been amazing against the pass. Then the Chargers, I was going to say Justin Herbert, but we don't know yet if it is going to be Justin Herbert. The Chargers are going to have to pass. And that could potentially not take J.K. Dobbins off the field because he's still going to play in passing downs, but potentially see less rushing volume for sure. So yeah, no, I do definitely tend to agree with this one. And it's not, as you say, any knock on J.K. Dobbins, who I'm so delighted to see succeeding and thriving.
100%.
Yeah, I'm so delighted to see it, but potentially not so much this week. But that's always the case with these sorts of players who break out early on. Before we get on to your second love and on with the rest of the show, if you're still watching, I would love if you would give us a like and a subscribe. There's so much more content to come on the channel over the rest of the season and beyond. And yeah, we'd love to have you with us to support it going forwards. So that was your first hate, but a player that you love, even if you don't particularly like them for this week. I love the player that you've brought up for your second love of the week. And it's someone that I got slated a little bit on Twitter. Well, I had a tweet go viral a couple of weeks ago for saying that they had disappointed, even though they weren't expected to be the starter and we thought they would explode for fantasy. And I had a lot of people coming back saying, the classic retweet, you don't know ball, you're just showing me that you don't know anything about the game. And I'm doing a Cockney accent for that, but it's obviously all like the rednecks that are doing that sort of shit because we're British. But I love him. I've put together 4 lineups for on DraftKings this week. He's in 2 of them. Although I am running him naked at the moment because I don't particularly like stacking him with anyone. That's anyway, enough from me sort of teasing who they are. Who is the second player that you love for week 2?
So my second player is Justin Fields of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Who'd thought we were saying that this time last year? I honestly think he's had more stick than he deserves so far in his career, but some of that has been deserved. I think he is better fancy than he is in real life. I think that's clear to see when you look at the consistency we saw in Chicago. And looking now, would Chicago have been better off keeping him? Probably not. When we kind of fast forward a couple of years, you can understand the logic. But I found it confusing all the way through the off season that there wasn't more conversation about who the QB1 was going to be in Pittsburgh. I think it was obvious it was going to be Russell, but I couldn't really see why that was so blatantly nailed on. There wasn't more discussion. Obviously, he's been lucky that he's got there via injury, but this is the week that really stands out to be one of those better weeks. And he's always been inconsistent for fantasy. You've always had the down weeks, but looking back to 2022, he was QB7 on the season. 2023, QB18, but only on 13 games. Is in a better situation. He's growing into the role. You're right. Start of the season, that was disappointing. We weren't seeing the Justin Fields that we were excited to hopefully see. Also excited because it meant Russell wasn't starting, but that's a different bias entirely. He's only 37% rostered as well at the moment. And wow. I think this week could well be his first 20-plus point finish of the season. He's got the Colts, giving up the second most total yards, including the second most to the run. So that's obviously where Justin Fields can get some work done, especially with, I think Jalen Warren is still questionable. I've not checked that today whether he's going to be in or not this weekend. Najee Harris, I never know when to call Najee Harris has been having a good game. Whereas Justin Fields, has always got a breakaway run in him. He's also seems to be helped. Pickens is starting to look better. Frymouth has looked a bit better than last season too so far. You're exactly right. DFS, I wouldn't want to stack either of those with him unless it was an extreme value at price. I think this week may finish up with Russell Wilson being a little bit worried about whether he walks straight back into that job or not.
I think this week could end up with some quite significant rumours of Russell Wilson ending up in Miami. Is how I potentially think this could go. Because I'm not convinced Tua's going to be back at all this season, and that's the best quarterback available. Not that it says a huge amount, but he would be, significantly better than Skylar Thompson. I've been really intrigued by Justin Fields. So the tweet that I had go viral was basically saying I thought. This guy, I thought we were told this guy was going to explode if he was the starter. And he had like 11 points in the first game and then about 14 in the second and barely any rushing yards. In week 3, I think he had 6 rushing yards, but one of them was for a touchdown. The really important thing for me, and I am going to have a video coming on Justin Fields relatively soon, once we've got a bit more of a sample size, is not the rushing. So far anyway, it's been his ability to go through progressions with better protection in front of him and also to read the middle of the field and throw with timing. That is something we never saw him do in Chicago. In Chicago, he was an explosive athlete and he could throw the ball deep. But if you actually make him do quarterback things, he really struggled. He really struggled to actually go through his progressions, see what's open, throw to it with touch and timing and to where the receiver's going to be. It was just either, is there anyone open deep? No, there's not. I'm going to take off. And for fantasy, that's great. Because obviously rushing yards are much better for us than passing yards for a quarterback. But definitely this week against the Colts with, I think Jaylen Warren is out. I think that's confirmed, but it might not be. And that offensive line is good, and the Colts defensive line is not so good at the moment. And I think they're missing DeForest Buckner as well. There's definitely an opportunity for Fields to start to open up his legs and to start to get some of that rushing floor again. And if you can combine that with kind of, I would suggest above average quarterback play that it's been at the minute, that's a very good fantasy quarterback. And that's a good NFL quarterback as well. So I would love this to be similar to, my thoughts about J.K. Dobbins with Justin Fields. I'm like, I don't like when a player is clearly trying their best and things are setting them aside, whether it be, the situation around you is just awful and you can't put it together and you're being criticized, or whether it be, injuries. I'm really rooting for Justin Fields. I think the kid seems amazing. I think he seems like a great person from everything he reads, and I'd love him to put it together. Obviously, for you as a Ravens fan, would have been better if he could have put it together somewhere else. Given the Steelers currently leading the division by 2 games,
Thank you for bringing that up. Appreciate that.
It's fine. The Bengals are 0-3. We'll just bring that up as well.
Yeah, that's okay.
I'm stunned you don't bring it up with your Bengals fan co-host on the show every single week.
We have to sit next to each other to record, so we have to keep it relatively calm.
I get that. But yeah, I really, really like Justin Fields for this week. And I definitely think as a DFS play on DraftKings, he's really low priced. So definitely can build up some really nice things with him. I've managed to put together a lineup that includes him and then enables me to have Kyren Williams, Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson, and Jamar Chase. So there's definitely ways you can build around him in week 4. Let's get on to the next player that you hate in week 4. And this is actually a player in the same game. And again, sort of the flip of what we were saying earlier in terms of lower drafted players that we're now going, oh, we have to start these guys. This is a higher drafted player that has been really disappointing and is almost unstartable at this point, partly because of the quarterback play around him, as much as we were excited about another rushing quarterback. Who is the second player that you hate for week 4?
So second player is, I wanted to put a player group, a team in this really, but I'm picking Michael Pittman, but I feel I could have gone for any Colts player not named Jonathan Taylor for this one, because this week he's an absolute must sit for me. And he's not a player I had a lot of exposure to at all, but someone I'd be worried about season long as well from this point onwards. I'm worried about him, full stop. I'm worried about the Colts offense, full stop. But this week against the miserly Steelers defense as well, only 26 points that they've conceded so far in the first 3 games, which is upsetting to see in the AFC North. But Pittman is currently the wide receiver 71 and was being drafted ADP wide receiver 21. He's not passed 4 receptions in a game yet this season, not had a touchdown since week 13, 2023. He's not broken the top 50 wide receivers at all this season. This is also an Anthony Richardson concern. He's only been fantasy relevant in week 1, and that was due to his rushing work. You take off his near 60 yards running in a touchdown, it was back down to an all right week. It's also a pro-Steeler defensive take, unfortunately, this one. Annoyingly, they've been really good. So not only have they only given up 26 points in actual games, they've only given up 8.17 points per game to QBs, fewest in the league. 14.5 points to the game to running backs, second fewest in the league. 22.13 to wide receivers, fourth fewest in the league. Depending how you've drafted, Michael Pittman could potentially be your wide receiver 1 in your redraft team. And I'd still be benching him this week. And that's, I think we're probably at the point, week 4 is maybe, not to have a hard and fast rule, but week 4 is probably about the time I stop putting as much weight in what I spent on a player draft capital wise as well. Tyreek Hill, we mentioned earlier, he's the exception. I think you're not going to see the best from him, but you never know. And if you took him, you're going to have him in your lineup somewhere, even if he ended up being your flex value player. Michael Pittman, I think you're struggling to justify that because you can't even see a route to a great game at the moment. My worry would be if you did take him as your wide receiver 1, who else have you got that you might need to start him anyway, unless you've been active on the waiver wire and you got yourself covered elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a really important sort of point to note, that we have to start letting go of the draft value at this point in the season. And whether that's a case of, having a player that you've picked up off waivers in Juwan Jennings that you're like, I need to start him. Like, I need to keep playing this player. Or whether it's a case of going, hey, I'm really sorry. Like, I drafted this player so high. And it's different when it's an injury thing. If you drafted Puka Nacua or you drafted someone else that's got injured early, that's different. But if you've drafted someone that's just not performing, whether that's because of them or whether that's because of the offense as a whole, you just need to consider whether or not they're actually startable at this point. I did want to have a quick question for you. I've got 2 actually. Would you rather start this week Michael Pittman, obviously playing against Pittsburgh, but with his starting quarterback, or would you rather start Jalen Waddle, playing against the Titans, but we don't know who the quarterback's going to be, either Skylar Thompson or Tim Boyle?
That, I imagine that's the level of question will be a popular start-sit question. So I'm saying drafted in fairly similar positions. I would very much hope I had other options, but if I had to choose between one of those 2, I think I'd probably go Waddle. But I genuinely don't know. I could see Pittman getting next to nothing this week. Waddle once again isn't giving you much hope, but he's someone that just feels like he could have a couple of big plays that get you just over there. I don't feel as confident in Pittman for that. And once again, there's not really a great deal of justification for either of those positive. I think I'd probably go Waddle.
Yeah, that's my inclination as well. It just comes down to the fact that Pittman needs a lot of targets to get going. Jalen Waddle can manufacture production on his own. You can give him a screen, or you can give him a slot fade, and he can burst open for 80 yards and a touchdown. He can Jalen Waddle can get the same fancy production off one players Michael Pittman will take 8 to do. And then my other question on Michael Pittman is, if you own him in Dynasty, what on earth are you doing right now? Are you holding see if it works out? or are you just trying to get rid and seeing if you can move on just from name value alone?
I'm hoping there is a very biased Colts fan in my league. So that's the only way you're going to get any value from him. I think, to be honest, his value will be rock bottom at the moment because obviously there's all those question marks on Anthony Richardson. I do think Anthony Richardson will come good. If you forget he's still really in his 6th game as a starter.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be panicking on any of the rookie QBs this year in a couple of weeks if they're having a bad start. I do worry a little bit about Richardson's style of playing. I always think it's overdone, especially being a Ravens fan. It's overdone sometimes, the QB injury risk of a running style. But after watching Lamar Jackson's running style evolve over the last few seasons, when I'm watching Richardson going, there's some work to be done here, even though you are a bigger bodied quarterback. I think you're probably going to hold Pittman until the offseason and hope some optimism brews. And I think I'd probably then look to move him on and hope people are, a little bit in on whatever is if there is any Colts buzz that goes on in the offseason. But yeah, I wouldn't want to have him on the roster, but I think you're going to struggle to get anything you'd be happy with value-wise unless someone was really in on him.
Yeah, I agree. It's very strange for Pittman that, we talk about Jalen Waddle with a backup quarterback. His backup quarterback, Joe Flacco, would definitely be better for him if he was to start.
Yeah, absolutely.
If Flacco was starting, Pittman would see a fair amount of volume and an accurate volume at that, just being a very different style of quarterback. But let's stop hankering on at Michael Pittman and let's move on to our titular feature. So this is Pancake Stacks. This is where you give your stack of the week for week 4. And the one that you've given, I absolutely love. It's also been talked about on the show before because, actually, no, it wasn't. The quarterback was, but the player stacked with them wasn't, which I'm very intrigued by. Talk me through your pancake stack for week 4.
So I thought about getting a little bit cute with this. I've been very lucky over the last few weeks in DFS that we managed to get on some stacks with Daniel Jones and Aves before that went up. Last week, went for the Dalton Thielen stack. If it wasn't for the injury, could have really come off. But this week, I'm going for one that seems like an obvious one to me and is potentially going to be such a great combination. And that is the Cardinals stack of Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. They're in such a good game environment this week. The highest line of any game, 50.5. Commanders are given up the second most yards to the pass in the league. They've given up 767 yards so far. They've given up the most fantasy points to QBs per game, 24.38. They've also given up the most fantasy points to wide receivers per game, 52.07. So it just all shapes up to be a fantastic game. Harrison nursing a quad injury. Apparently, Burt will start. McBride out with concussions. That's 6 more targets going begging somewhere. They could go lots of different places, but Harrison's targets have already steadily climbed over the last few weeks as well, from 3 to 8 to 11 last week. And we've seen flashes of him being absolutely as advertised. I think probably he's not getting quite the attention on him because of the way Malik Neighbours has played over the last couple of games. But this game environment, this growing connection between Murray and Harrison, I think could really pay dividends this week. If you've got that as a stack in your redraft or dynasty, you are laughing for many years by the looks of it. Redraft, you'll be very happy for the rest of the season. And if you can make it work cost-wise in DFS this week, this could be an absolute golden combination.
Yeah, I actually think you'll struggle to build a DFS lineup in a tournament without some Cardinals pieces this week. I think this is just, there's such a high over-under. There's like incredible offensive production on both sides. Whether it's a case that you want to look at Jaden Daniels, skinny, with Marvin Harrison and James Conner on the other side, or whether it's looking at Kyler and MHJ and then Terry McLaurin as a bring back. Like, I think this is absolutely the game to target. The Commanders have that incredible for fantasy value, good offense, terrible defense. Like, that's what we want. That's what we want to see, because it means that a team isn't going to completely blow them out of the water. They haven't punted in the last 2 games. The offense is really good, but the defense is so terrible, as you've said, that's the kind of matchup that we want to target. And I absolutely love MHJ for this week. And I think Kyler is really undervalued as well. I think having watched the Cardinals destroy my Rams in week 2, it really made you appreciate quite how good Kyler Murray is now that he's even further away from the injury. And I think there's a very good chance that Kyler and Marvin Harrison Jr. could finish as QB1 and wide receiver 1 on the week this week. So I absolutely love this pancake stack. I think it's pretty much guaranteed to succeed. That is going to bring us to an end for the show. Thank you so much for coming on and joining me. It's always so much fun chatting with you. If people want to find out more from you, where can they find you?
So you can find us over on Twitter, th_fancy_NFL, and then wherever you get your podcast as well. It's the often said phrase, but wherever you find your podcast, find us on TH Fancy Football Show. We have our weekly show out on a Tuesday, and then our Fancy 5 short format out on a Friday as well.
And I can absolutely recommend both. They are absolutely spectacular. And if you're a new fantasy player, I went on the other day to talk about those redraft basics, as we mentioned, and that episode it's really worth a listen. And you can see how we work the other way around, with the other one as the host and the other one as the guest. Thank you so much for joining me. I really, really appreciate it, Pestell. So it's always a pleasure to chat to you.
No, really appreciate having us on as well. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And thank you so much to you for watching. This has been week 4 Pancake Stacks. If you've enjoyed, please consider liking and subscribing, and we will see you next time.